Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. Welcome back to our lunchtime session, and I hope everybody had a really good time during their earlier sessions. I have a couple of announcements that I think will be of great interest to any of you who have automobiles. How many of you drove here and parked? How many of you drove here and parked? Okay. If you prepaid as you parked, you don't need to listen to me. If you did not yet pay and you want a validation, we have Shayna. Shayna, where are you in the room here? Has a validation, or you can get it. Shayna, you're there. We also have validations at the desk where you checked in, so please get that validation. If you prepaid, it's the same price as you would get with that validation. Please be sure to get validated so that you can get your car out of here today. So everyone wants to do that. Anyway, I'd like to, if I could, call everyone to attention for just a little bit. We have some really notable speakers here today, and I know folks are excited about what we've been talking about today. The work is thrilling, our colleagues are thrilling, and I will ask for your attention while we proceed with our program. Many of you know the work and the mission of the San Diego Housing Federation quite well, but we're really pleased to welcome many newcomers here to today's conference. And whether this is your first or your 27th conference, and yes, there's some of you out there who've probably been here that many times and remember it at Point Loma Nazarene or at the Jacobs Center, hopefully you're learning a great deal, engaging in provocative conversations about the present and future of affordable housing in San Diego, and meeting and connecting to great leaders and partners that will support you in your work. The San Diego Housing Federation was established in 1990 with the goal of strengthening the nonprofit affordable housing field in San Diego County. For 28 years, we've been the leading voice dedicated to the promotion and advancement of policies and programs that help our region build and preserve the affordable housing that our region so desperately needs. We do this in a number of ways. By providing education and capacity building to those who build, finance, and advocate for affordable homes, by educating the public and elected officials on the importance and positive impact of affordable housing, and by advocating for policies that support our critical work. Our membership includes over 175 of the county's top affordable housing developers, funders, development partners, service providers, and nonprofit advocacy organizations. Our work would not be possible without the support of our members and donors, so I want to thank everyone who supports the San Diego Housing Federation today and every day of the year. Thank you. And I am reminded from this morning, perhaps if we started every session with a church choir, folks would get their good church manners on and sit up straight and listen to the program. And I want to remind you, I want to take you back to that place, that space we were at this morning when we're talking about the reason for what we do, the mission of this organization. But our work would not be possible without the support of all of our members. And if your organization isn't a member, you should be, and I invite you to come and meet me or anyone else who's with staff to find out more about the benefits of Federation membership. Thank you to the supporting organizations of the Federation, and now to our lunch sponsors, Gaulden State Finance Authority. We'd like to thank Gaulden State Finance Authority. Let's give a big hand for them. And now I'm hoping that you have all been posting on social media. It's been amazing to be able to scroll through the hashtag demanding solutions and see the great conversations that have been happening today right in this space. So don't be shy. Keep us posted on what you're seeing, what you're learning. And I'm hoping that you're making good use of the Wi-Fi. Again, Redstone Equity is a sponsor, and in case you hadn't guessed, the password is Redstone, all lowercase letters. And finally, I hope you've been making use of the Whova mobile app. We're trying this out for the first time. There is no competition between us and SCAMP and NPH and Housing California. But we're going to do better than them, right? We want to do an application. We want to show ways that we can improve and up our game a little bit. So thank you for participating in Whova. All of us should appreciate how much planning, vision, and effort go into making an event like this a success. A group of very talented and dedicated individuals committed a great deal of time over the past few months to develop an outstanding program, secure presenters and speakers, invite conference supporters to sponsor it, and to help this conference be successful in so many other ways. Will all the members of the 2018 Affordable Housing and Community Development Conference Planning Committee please stand up? Committee members, everyone who is part of the committee, let's hear a big hand for folks. We had a remarkable number of submittals this year, and the best, so we really rely on the expertise of our members to choose these panels. Another group of talented and dedicated individuals to recognize are those whom I have the honor of serving alongside, the member of the San Diego Federation Board of Directors. Will the members of the Board of Directors please stand up? Board members, please. Thank you. I'm really honored to have such an amazing group of professionals to back me up. Every year, a group of amazing individuals comes forward to lend their time and talent to this event as volunteers as well. And it's amazing that when you look at everyone, virtually everyone who's helping, I've got a staff of 6. Everybody else here is volunteering their time to help this event take place. And I don't think we could ask for a more intelligent or more dedicated team. If you were a volunteer this year, would you please stand? Our volunteers, please. Oh. Thank you everyone. And last but not least, I want to thank the Housing Federation staff for all your hard work in planning this event and executing it so seamlessly. And I want to give a big shout out, and everybody knows how valuable this is, Miss Sarah Buchanan. Let's get a big hand for Miss Sarah Buchanan, who makes this all happen. We're also very appreciative of our lunch keynote sponsor, US Bank, and so please join me in welcoming to the stage Raquette Ewell, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility and Community Development Manager of Southern California with US Bank. Let's welcome Raquette to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of my US Bank colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to support this event, and thank you to Steve and the amazing team at the San Diego Housing Federation for all the good work you're doing. Thank you also to all of you who are gathered here today. It's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker. I had the opportunity to chat with him just a little bit before I came up here. He's a remarkable human being with an amazing story. I asked him sort of what's the thing that you've done that you really want me to highlight and share when I do the introduction, and he said, well, you could mention that I wrote a memoir. That's one of the most excellent achievements that I've had thus far, but it was also one of the hardest things I've done. And I said, really? Or it's the second hardest thing that I've done. And I said, so what was the hardest thing? And he paused and said, the hardest thing was being homeless here for about 10 years. So thank you for sharing that amazing for sharing your amazing story with us. And let me tell you a little bit more about his background. Michael Gaulden is the debut author of My Way Home. That's the memoir. That's the second hardest thing that he had to do. It chronicles his life growing up homeless for 10 years in San Diego. He's a former qualitative and quantitative researcher at UCLA's Black Male Institute and former director of business and community relations for Reality Changers, a wonderful college preparation organization that probably folks who are San Diego based are familiar with. Its focus is on supporting first-generation college students. Michael is currently the Career Exploration Coordinator and Internship Coordinator for the Monarch School Project, which is the only operational school in the U.S. that exclusively educates K through 12 students impacted by homelessness. So he's uniquely positioned to be a resource for those young people. Michael's an education enthusiast, musician, spoken word poet, arts advocate, and activists. So please join me in welcoming Michael Gaulden to the stage today.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Greetings. Well, it's a pleasure for me to share this afternoon with you all. My narrative pretty much begins in June of 1998 until July of 2009. So from ages 7 to 17, I was a homeless youth right here in San Diego, more specifically right here in downtown San Diego. I've slept outside. on park benches, staircases. I've lived in shelter after shelter. If you've ever experienced hunger, then you understand exactly what I mean. How it feels to starve when everyone else around you is eating. It's like striking a match and dropping it down your throat, and it has nothing but gasoline. And every night my hunger set me on fire. I was laughed at, humiliated, teased, all because I did not have a home. You see, homelessness was as a noose around my neck that tightened with every step that I took. I could not breathe. And no, it was not just me. I watched as homelessness separated children and hung their parents to death. And I literally do mean to death. I often wondered how long even I had left. I too am a victim of the rages of society. Hate crimes left me beat with 3 fractures cracked into my face, bruised ribs, gas bubbles under each eye, bloody, unconscious upon the same streets that in which I slept. And this is how I survived for 10 years of my life. I mean, even now sometimes when I close my eyes, I'm still haunted at night. I openly stated I needed a job, an opportunity, college. I just needed my life to advance. But instead of resources or housing, I was assessed based upon my circumstance. I said, but I don't want my life to be of waste, that I want to succeed and exceed the expectations of those in need. They said, succeed? Michael, can't you tell? You're already homeless. You've already failed. Matter of fact, you'll probably end up like your father, serving 15 years to life for murder in jail. Or like your grandfather, who was murdered in jail. Or you'll end up like your great-grandfather, who was killed as well. Well, innately, I did not like that story. Yes, I was homeless, but why should that define me? Yes, I grew up living beneath the poverty line. But why should that define me? Yes, I lived in shelter after shelter from here to Virginia to Texas to Oregon. But why should that map out my life trajectory? You see, when I was in high school, I did my biology under a street light because you see, that's what should define me. Will, perseverance, resilience, grit. I understood my route to success would be harder than most. That my obstacles will be stronger, my journey longer, and no, it was not fair. But that was my reality. I did not want to perpetuate the plight of impoverished people. I wanted to break free the chains of homelessness and change the circumstance that I was born into. But first, I had to get off the streets. When I was 17, I got a job as a custodian. And even worse, it was from my own high school of San Diego High, which is right downtown. So you can imagine my self-esteem as a 16-year-old homeless custodian. my peers saw me on my hands and knees, wiping up smeared feces and urine and graffiti, and that's just in the boys' bathroom. I don't really like to talk about all the things I saw in that girls' bathroom. I was just like too young at the time. But or scraping up gum, trash duty, spilling spilled milk all over your pants, and going home to the car and throwing the pants overboard, the roof, you know, ready to go to work the next day. It was one of the most embarrassing, humiliating feats I've ever had to do. But I understood that hard work pays off. It always does, and it always will. And at the age of 17, with the earnings from that income, I was able to move my family out of our car into our first apartment in 10 years, successfully beating our streak of homelessness. But I understood the point was to stay off the streets. And for me, education was the key to upward mobility. So I applied to a few schools. Well, I joined a college prep organization named Reality Changers. And I told them I only wanted to go to San Diego State. It's the only college I really heard of. It was my dream school. I'm like, that's it for me. And then a founder was like, how about you apply to a few more? I'm like, no, that's it, San Diego State. That's where I'm going. Lucky for me, I listened because I did not get into San Diego State. Broke my heart. But I was able to receive a full ride to UCLA. But, yeah, baby. So now here I am. I've come full circle, back to where it all began. Helping the same homeless kids that I once were, having them walk down my shoes, trying to show them a different way. Same work I believe that you all are doing for our families, our kids, our parents, our women, our men, because it does take a village to raise a child. And even more so, it takes a community to uplift its people. And so I ask you, remember, home is where the heart is. But if you do not have a home, where does your heart go? Again, my name is Michael Gaulden. I'll be in the lobby with some of my memoirs. I want to thank you for sharing this afternoon with me. Thank you.
So today has been a day of music and now of poetry. I think it's important that we connect with the reasons why we do the work we do, and I really appreciate Mr. Gaulden sharing his story with us. And I hope that you will share more of his story when you're out in the lobby. But thank you for helping ground, thank you, Michael, for helping ground us in the work that we do. It means a lot to a lot of us. I'm a little bit I'm flummoxed, I'll be honest. Thank God I have a script. So I'm going to keep up the momentum. I'm going to invite up Mr. Ken Sauter, he's the president and CEO of Lakeland Housing and Development Corporation. He's also the recipient of our 2018 Housing Champion Award at the Ruby Awards this year. Let's welcome Ken Sauter to the stage.
Thank you very much, Steve. I also want to just say, Michael, thank you very much for that presentation. It really does speak to what we are doing today. And as Steve said, both the music this morning and your story really do make the day in many ways complete. So thank you so much for that. As Steve said, my name's Ken Sauter, and I'm the president and CEO of Lakeland Housing and Development Corporation. I'm excited today to introduce Annise Parker, who in a few moments, and I'm thrilled to really be introducing her. Today, Annise Parker is president and CEO of the Lbgt Victory Fund and the Lbgtq Victory Institute. They're two congruent organizations that fund and train Lbgtq candidates for government office. Annise Parker is one of only two women to have been elected mayor of Houston, and she is the only person in Houston's history to have held the office of council member, controller, and mayor. She is also the first openly Lbgtq person elected mayor of a national major American city. But perhaps she is best known for her role as mayor of Houston in providing leadership in addressing the homelessness issue. Here in San Diego, we are also working hard to address the homelessness issue and how to really work at it and make it happen and dealing with the struggles that are involved in that. And as we know, this is an issue that is very complex. It's very tangled, sort of like a tangled knot with multiple causes and solutions. Addressing it in a meaningful way requires real leadership and a lot of support from community stakeholders. Today we are going to learn more about how Mayor Parker figured out to at least partially untie that knot, because you cannot argue with facts. You know, the fact of the matter is that under her tenure and her leadership, the homeless population in Houston decreased by 60%. This monumental decline, thank you. This monumental decline didn't happen by accident. Mayor Parker led the efforts on analyzing the far-reaching crisis, bringing stakeholders together, and working to pool their resources. She also did a great job of really communicating decisions with lasting impacts. And I think that her leadership, from what I've read on her and what I understand, is her leadership was very key and central to making the real change, to make the real changes to reduce the homelessness problem in the fine city of Houston. So conference attendees and anybody else who is listening out there, I am truly honored to introduce the Honorable Mayor Annise Parker to the stage. Let's give her a big San Diego welcome.
Okay, I have a slight problem. It's really dark up here. Can the house lights come up a little bit, or is that... You don't want to see what you're eating, do you? Okay. I'm getting older. I have to put the glasses on. And I actually do have a PowerPoint, but you're not going to see it. So you're going to have to listen. And I actually wasn't going to start this way, but after Michael's remarks, I'm going to have to want to talk a little bit about why I'm involved in this issue of homelessness. I am glad that you invited me. I'm really excited to be here. I've been out of office now 2 years and 9 months. I'm still in withdrawals, and it's nice to still be invited places and get to sit in front instead of the back. But I have my own personal connection to homelessness, and it's not from me, but it's in my family. And that is that 25 years ago, I was an activist in Houston. My now wife and I had been together 3 years. We've been together 28 years now, but we've been together 3 years at the time. And as a very visible lesbian activist in Houston, I was always invited to give talks to street kids who were on the street who might be LGBT. And there was a young kid that I saw off and on over a few years. He was a gorgeous, bright young man, and he was being raised by his grandparents, and they kept trying to beat the gay out of him. And he'd run away, and he'd live on the streets for a while, then he'd go back, or they'd get frustrated with him because he's a cocky little so-and-so, and they'd throw him out. So he's back and forth on the streets of Houston for several years. And one day, it happened to be Gay Pride weekend, just before the Pride Parade, and I'm wandering down around the streets, and I see him, and he has a little duffel bag in his hand, and he had a street name. He has a real name. His real name is Jovan, but he has a street name, which was Lbgtq. And I said, Lbgtq, what are you doing? How are you doing? Are you back on the streets? And he kind of hung his head, and he said, yeah, he was back on the streets again, and that he'd been on the streets for a couple of weeks and didn't know what he was going to do next, and he had everything he owned in this little duffel bag. And I don't know what possessed me, but I reached in my pocket and I handed him the key to my house, and I gave him the address, and I said, go let yourself in, get cleaned up, take a shower, we'll figure something out. I'm tired of you living on the street. And then I went to find my wife and tell her what I'd done. He followed me home. Can I keep him? No. But what we discovered was that there was no place for him to go. There weren't any agencies that would take, we actually had Covenant House there, but they wouldn't take him because he was gay, and there was no place else for him to go. And he stayed a week, and then he stayed another week, and then he just stayed. And he's 42 years old today. We are proud to call him our son. And he got his GED. He has a 2-year associate's degree. He is a wonderful, upstanding young man. He married his boyfriend last year, and we're really, really proud of him. But I learned a lot about youth homelessness from him, and I learned a lot about what kids on the street have to do to survive, that none of us would want to have to go through. So fast forward, I am mayor of the city of Houston, and there's not a major city in America that doesn't struggle with homelessness and the larger issues of enough housing for everybody who wants to be in those cities to be safe and comfortable. The failure, in my view, to solve homelessness is not fundamentally a resource issue. We spend billions nationwide to address the symptoms and results of homelessness. And many homeless men and women have assets. Some are veterans with underutilized benefits, or seniors who can tap pensions or Medicare or Social Security. If they have a little help and they have a fixed income, or excuse me, a fixed address so they can access that income, it's not about resources. And the failure to solve homelessness is not fundamentally because we don't understand the root causes of homelessness, including mental health problems, addiction, inadequate social support systems, unequal access to economic opportunity. Failure to solve homelessness is not from a lack of compassion. There are hundreds of organizations focused on this problem and putting their resources to good use to address homelessness. But the problem is that there's no one thing that can solve it, and there is no one entity that's in charge. And when there is no one thing and no one place to turn, usually we just sort of throw up our hands and we say it's too complicated to address it. But I'm here to tell you that while there's no one thing, there are many things, if done concurrently and in coordination, can make a difference. But it's a little more complicated than that, and that is that any solution is very much context specific. It matters where you are and what's on the ground. And any solution requires really, really good data. And of course, any solution to homelessness focuses on housing first. And we've already, the right kind of housing with permanent wraparound social services to keep people in housing. But it also, in addition to those things, it requires the will to push businesses and the nonprofit world to meet the need as it exists, not as they wish it would be. It requires reprioritizing dollars that are already being spent. You're moving somebody's cheese all the time if you're going to make this work. It requires extensive education and community buy-in. And then it requires the creation of a dynamic system that can grow into the future as issues change. And I don't know whether Houston's system will always work, but I'm proud of what we were able to do, and we did create that dynamic system that's working really well today with a new set of challenges under the new mayor, and I'm going to address those just briefly. And of course, all of these things that I've talked about how, and I will talk about what we did in order to drop our rate of homelessness so dramatically, begs the question of how to turn off the spigot of people moving into homelessness. And I'm really not going to talk about that today. The flawed foster care system where kids age out without life skills. And oh, by the way, my wife and I have 3 other kids that came out of the foster care system. The non-existent mental health and substance abuse services in our cities. Minimum wage jobs that don't support families, and often crushing medical bills that drive people into homelessness. Can't talk about that today, but we all know that the issues of homelessness exist in that realm as well. So, in the years 2011 and 2015, Houston reduced homelessness by more than any other city in America. Our success was the direct result of adopting a comprehensive regional plan. I'm going to read this, because my staff was really proud of this. A comprehensive regional plan that embraced best practices and an unprecedented level of collaboration between stakeholders who combined their resources and efforts to achieve transformative results. That sounds really great. And it's actually not very easy to say, but it was a lot easier to say than it was to do. But the key part is that we came together and we put all our resources together. It was transformative. We reduced chronic homelessness by nearly 76%, in a 4-year period, veteran homelessness by 99%, and overall homelessness by 57%. In order to do that, we had to very quickly get 2,500 permanent supportive housing units on the ground. We had to create a new service delivery model, and we had to create a coordinated placement system among all of the agencies in that space. Houston had some positives that other cities might not have. I will acknowledge that I was blessed with, Houston's the most affordable big city in America. We have some of the lowest land and housing costs. I mean, relatively speaking, relative to other major cities, but a lot of cheap housing and a lot of apartment availability. We had a very active and engaged nonprofit sector. We have no zoning in Houston. I'll let that sink in. In fact, I've been speaking for years. I get invited to a lot of conferences on city planning, and they want me to, so they can laugh at me, because Houston doesn't have zoning. But what that means is that we can permit really quickly, and we can put things in places that people may not want them to be, but there are no inherent reasons why they can't go there. A warehouse district can become trendy lofts in about a month period, literally, in terms of permitting. And that was a blessing as we were going through this process. And then the other asset was my willingness to burn political capital on this issue. So, thank you. Now, the negatives in Houston are like the negatives in a lot of places. We had a balkanized support system. The city proper is 640 square miles, and it has one of the worst transit systems in the United States. I'll own that. We did a lot of good improving it while I was mayor, but it's still tough to cover 640 square miles within the city limits of Houston. We're a low-tax, low-service state, and the state of Texas doesn't give any money to cities. We're all on our own. So our money had to come from the federal government, or it had to come locally. And what we ultimately came down to, and I like mnemonics, and so I have a bunch of C's here. This is how we got there. Convene, communicate, collaborate, collate, consolidate, community. Although, I may repeat that, and I think it's convene, communicate, collaborate, communicate, collate, communicate, consolidate, communicate, community, communicate, and keep communicating because people forget. And a lot of what happens across the country is as soon as you start saying you're going to do something about homelessness, everybody gets concerned because you're going to do something to them. And a lot of communication helps. And some of that communication has to be around the myths and fears that people have that aren't homeless, or who aren't homeless. One of them is that if you build it, they will come. If you put a homeless facility in my neighborhood, people will come from all over actually, if you put a homeless facility here in San Diego, people will come from all over America to take advantage of it. Really? They're homeless. But they're not unlike any other person. You come to a city for the same reasons that anyone else does. The homeless come to a city for a job, because they have a family member here, because they have some connection to that city. Now, there is clearly some drift within a community. If you put a facility one place and not another place, and people want to access that facility, they will have to figure out a way to get there. But I can't tell you how many mayors I've talked to who say, well, my community doesn't want us to do more for the homeless because they're afraid that more homeless people will come. Very, very frustrating mindset. Takes a lot of conversations. Another good one is that, well, I'm not talking about shelters here, but a high-quality SRO, a single-room occupancy, or a high-quality affordable housing project drags down property values. Not true. A low-quality project will, and I know there's a lot of developers in the room, but if you do it right up front, we have SROs that I would be proud to live in Houston, and that actually build up the neighborhoods in which we've placed them, because they have other amenities and they are high-quality projects that attract other developers to those neighborhoods. Of course, there's also the kind of myths like, well, we'll just need more civility ordinances, and the idea that civility ordinances actually work in any way other than to dehumanize people on the street and push them from one area to another. And of course, there's another one that everybody needs the same services. And we already know that, 20% of the people use 80% of the services. That's the way the world works. And so one of the things that really made a difference for us is trying to figure out how to get to that 20% that uses the most of the services, and then put something in place that actually helped the broader context. What I said, some of the assets of Houston that helped me had nothing to do with, it's just some of the facts of Houston. But the stars aligned for me, and I'll take credit for getting involved in this issue and pushing it, but I had a little bit of luck, and never discount luck. In 2011, there was a shift in leadership across multiple entities. City and county health departments, the city and county housing departments, the city and county housing authorities. It was a bad year. And the Coalition for the Homeless. Every one of those agencies got a new director. It meant there wasn't a lot of institutional memory, which was a great thing. It meant that I didn't have 10 people who were committed to whatever they'd been doing for the last 10 years. I had new people with energy and ideas that they wanted to try out, but if I said, you've been doing it wrong, they didn't get mad at me because it wasn't them doing it wrong, and that was a huge blessing. The second way the stars aligned was that HUD named Houston a HUD priority community and designated us a 1 CPD site. If you don't know what that is, I'm not going to tell you. But if you do, you'll understand. We had federal attention and help in putting a plan together. Then I made, as I said, a public commitment to address homelessness. In fact, I put it in my inaugural speech when I was sworn in my second term as mayor in 2012. And I said I was going to put whatever resources I had available within the city to addressing it. That it's a moral issue, it's a quality of life issue, it's a financial issue, and for me, and even though I didn't talk about this in my inaugural speech, this is a personal issue as well. Then another star aligned, so it was the perfect situation. The White House announced a push to house homeless veterans. I don't know if any of y'all remember that, but 2011, 2012, White House announced having veterans on the street is a national embarrassment. We have to do something about it. And they asked cities to compete and agree to a competition, and it was, could you house 100 homeless veterans in 100 days? Well, I already had a veteran services coordinator. There are a lot of veterans in Houston. We actually had a lot of veterans on the street. I'm like, well, I got a lot of them. We could probably do that. Let's try it. But the best part was that they made new dollars available for this initiative. Veterans Administration made VASH dollars available, veterans housing dollars available to cities to help facilitate this challenge. Well, having this new challenge allowed us to bring people together and say, it's a short-term deal. 100 days, 100 veterans, it's patriotic, brought everybody in the room together, ante up. What can you help, or what can you do to help in this process? And no one was defensive. It wasn't affecting anything they were doing. Everybody came together for 100 veterans. We actually, in 100 days, we housed 101 homeless veterans. Then we did it again. And I said, this is so cool. Let's do it again. And we did it again. And we did it 4 times. And then, guess what? We had a whole new paradigm. We had new relationships. And I knew what every agency had to offer, and who the power agencies were, and who the weak agencies were. I wish I could have thought of doing something like that, but I certainly, and I didn't, but I certainly took advantage of it. And as part of our HUD designation, HUD engaged the Coalition for Supportive Housing and sent us technical assistance, and we did a charrette, 400 stakeholders and 36 national experts to explore homelessness in Houston. So we had this new mindset. It had people who were not embedded in the old system, and we had a big, high-level charrette to talk about what was possible and open ideas. And I wish I could say there it was. Well, the ground was fertile, but it still took a lot of work. But because we had a new mission and new leadership and new oversight and new roles and new ideas and new landscape of activism, it made everything else that followed possible. So the next really important thing I did, other than it's what mayors do. I made a pronouncement. I'm going to put the city resources behind it, and then I hired the right person. And I hired a woman by the name of Mandy Chapman-Simple. Some of you may know Mandy. She was with the Coalition for Supportive Housing. She coordinated all of my activities around homelessness. So there was one person. Because if I'm working across multiple city departments, somebody had to keep track of what they were doing. And it had to be somebody who reported directly to me, because I couldn't put one department director or one department, even the housing department, in charge of the other departments. She was employed by the Coalition for Supportive Housing, but she was leased to the city of Houston. We paid her salary, but she stayed on their ultimate payroll. When we started to address the larger homelessness issue, we knew we had about 10,000 people on the street with roughly 2,500 chronically homeless. And the first and most important step was understanding who they were. And I've used this phrase several times already today, and this highlights a crucial factor. We talk about the homeless like they're interchangeable widgets. No, it's John and James and Fred and Sally, and they're each individuals, and they each have a complex set of needs. But always in the past, we're the homeless. And we have a system, and it's one size fits all, and you have to fit into it. So we decided to really see what we had, and so we created Houston Registry Week. So 1 week, we went out and we did in-depth interviews with as many homeless people as would talk to us. And we conducted 847 individual interviews over the course of that week. I went, made some great photo ops, talking to people, but the real work was done, 847 interviews. And we talked about who had physical or mental or addiction problems. We asked them who was a veteran, who'd been in jail. We tracked how many emergency room visits they'd had. We asked how long they'd been homeless, when they last worked, whether they had resources. We asked how they spent their days. And we found out that 15% were female, 18% were veterans, nearly half had chronic health conditions, nearly half had mental health conditions, nearly half had substance abuse issues. 81%, and I'm going to come back to this, 81% had been jailed for unpaid tickets or for loitering or trespassing, so they almost all had criminal records of some kind. And 50% used the emergency rooms in Houston for primary health care. And we calculated that, working with the hospitals, to be about $100 million a year just in emergency room visits. So we knew what our population looked like. So then we decided, well, we know what the population looks like, and we already know how much we spend in emergency room visits. So let's really think about the cost to the city. And when you added police and EMS and street and park cleanup to the emergency room costs, we're way over that $100 million figure. And then you add in the cost of the shelters and the services that all these nonprofits provide, you double that figure. And we didn't even attempt to calculate the cost of lost business or property values in areas with high concentration. We figured we had enough of a big number to get people's attention. And so then we had that communication. We had lots and lots of community conversations about who the men and women on our streets were, not the homeless, but who the men and women on our streets were and what they really needed. And we had to have that conversation with the public, and we had to have that conversation with the agencies that were serving the homeless. And that astounded me. But what I found out is that agencies get good at what agencies do, and then they just keep doing it, and they're in their little path. And a lot of times even though they came together every month and met with the Coalition for the Homeless, they really didn't look at the broader landscape. The single biggest problem we found among the agencies working together is that they didn't share information. So we had dozens of really wonderful organizations doing really great work, operating in parallel to each other. They never converged on the problem, and they didn't really share data. So we realized really early on that we'd have to force them or convince them to share or to go use a coordinated intake system. And in my PowerPoint presentation, I have this great slide that shows all the different arrows coming in from different directions as somebody goes to one shelter to get a meal, and another shelter to get a shower, and another to talk to a housing navigator, and another one to get a different meal, and then there's healthcare, and they're one-offs. And they could get referred, but we didn't ever have a holistic picture of any one individual. So absolute critical was convincing everybody to come on to one intake shared database system so that we could track people through the system. And I can't tell you how many people whined about what we've already invested in a system. Well, figure out how it will talk to the master system if you want to get your money. And that's what works. We had all this data, and we had all these conversations internally, and we developed this transformative regional plan working with the broader coalition of stakeholders. And at some point, you have to call it something to differentiate it from what we've done before. So we called it The Way Home. And we had more than 100 agencies across the city, governmental agencies, non-governmental agencies, committing to The Way Home. and it called for ending chronic homelessness by the end of, and veterans homelessness by the end of 2016, and youth and family homelessness by the end of 2020. You have to give yourself goals, even stretch goals. And as I indicated, we effectively ended veterans homelessness. Doesn't mean there's not a homeless veteran on the street. It means that if we find them and can persuade them off the street, we can place them immediately. And that persuade them off the street is one of the problems with homelessness. It is not illegal to be homeless. It is not illegal to decide you don't want to have a house. It's not illegal to live in your own mental world and maybe end up under a bridge someplace. It's a terrible thing to have happen, but it's not illegal, and you can't force people to take advantage of the opportunities that are there. But we did our best to move people through the process. And you've heard the statistics of what we were able to provide. But for the first time, we had the government agencies, the nonprofit agencies who had all been meeting with each other, and the funders in the room. And that was a critical piece, because here's where mayors can convene and mayors can direct city resources. Sometimes mayors can also get the big stick out, and that was my job. I just told Mandy, whenever you need me to come and tell people what they don't want to do, just call me. Otherwise, you're on your own. But, well, not quite that way. But my final step was creating an advisory group of business leaders, community leaders, faith leaders, the Catholic Cardinal, for example, the president of the Houston Texans, as a group that would meet with me every other month, and my director, my special assistant on homelessness, Mandy, and go over the numbers and hold us accountable. Because I was holding them accountable, but I wanted somebody else to make sure I got to go in and show these business leaders what we're doing every other month as well. And the largest philanthropic funder in the city of Houston, the Houston Endowment, was on that as well. And that was one of the reasons that the nonprofits, even though they whined, didn't completely go crazy on me, was because their number one funder was sitting in the room at the end of the day. So, convene all significant stakeholders. The Coalition for the Homeless, their member organizations, they became members of the Continuum of Care and bought into the Way Home, along with the relevant government organizations. I just talked about the Leadership Council that I created. We had to keep communicating the shared mission and goals. Collaboration, I'm talking about optimization of assets, and I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about that, because that was another really hard piece. Collate is the shared tracking system that provides real-time feedback that we had to push every agency to load their data into. Use data to consolidate and streamline as necessary. We also, and I'm not surprised at this, but we discovered that there was a funder focus or an agency focus. Everybody did things that were easy for them rather than a client-centered focus. And once we convinced everybody that it was all about the client, that a lot of opportunities opened up to make it easier to access the system. There were very clear carrots and sticks through this process. And then the community is building broader community support for the new system. We had to just keep going back to the community to tell them that we were doing things. And I did some things that I'm glad I did, and I wouldn't do them over again differently, but proved tremendously painful. One of the things I did was, working with my homeless advocates, we mandated that if people wanted to feed the homeless in large-scale feeding operations, that they had to coordinate through the city of Houston. If you do a cursory internet search, at some point, my name will pop up and you'll find thousands of people across the United States who say, I hate homeless people and I don't want them to have food. No, I want them to have a nice meal, an appropriate setting that is safe and coordinated, because what we had was, we have a lot of great churches in Houston that were feeding the homeless, and they'd show up at the same street corner an hour apart and try to feed the same 30 folks. instead of a coordinated system where if you're starting with 10,000 people on the street, let's not feed the same 30 people. Let's figure out a way to make sure that everyone eats. And I can't tell you how many times I was told that God called them to feed the homeless, and I said, go have another conversation. And not making light of that, truly, but go have another conversation, because what I think God wanted you to do was do it in a way that provided dignity. I actually had someone come down to City Council and harangue me at one of the public sessions, and he said every morning he went to Dunkin' Donuts and he got a big stack of donuts and he took them to a dumpster and they left them in the box but put them in the dumpster so the homeless can find it. And he thought that was a good thing. I mean, think about that. So we passed a homeless feeding ordinance in the city of Houston, and that sidelined some of it. It made it a lot harder to do. If I would have waited probably until we'd done some other things before I did that, because it got a lot of folks crossways with me that I probably shouldn't have gotten crossways early on. But I said I'd come back to the hardest step in that, all those C's, which was optimizing existing assets. We analyzed how much each service provider was spending in what areas and from what source of funds. And we also asked all housing providers their total number of beds managed, how long each had remained vacant, and what their target population was. So, when we first started out, and we're like, okay, we need 2,500 beds really fast. You can't go build fast. We have to figure out where you can free something up. And the city's housing authority, at my request, turned over all of their Section 8 vouchers. They were sitting on 1,000 Section 8 vouchers, just in case. Well, I had a new director over there, and he gave me all those 1,000 vouchers, and we started pushing them out. But we also discovered, as we looked at each of the agencies, that there were hundreds of beds available every night that were empty. And it was because the different agencies, they each had their own little niche of who they wanted to house and where they were, and you had to be able to find them, and you had to fit their criteria. And we let that go for a little while as we gathered the data, but then at one point we finally had to say, we have all of these empty beds that serve this portion of the population. If 15% of the people on our street were women, I don't need 25% of the beds to be for women. If 50% of the people on the street have mental health or substance abuse issues, I need close to that number of the percentage of beds that can have those social services attached to them. And so we had to have really hard conversations. And these were agencies that had been doing great work for a long time, and they had really high-profile boards who cared very, very much about doing the right thing, but they were doing what they were doing, and I had to say, I'm sorry, I have to move your money because you're not meeting the need as it is today. And fortunately, because we'd done so much communication, we'd gotten so many agencies to the table and so much buy-in, again, some whining, but I'm a mom, I understand whining. You just keep going. And we also realized that we were funding all the agencies at the broadly for the same services on a similar per capita basis, and some agencies were a lot more efficient and effective. And I didn't want to put any agency out of business, but I also didn't want to put my money in the wrong places, and so we had to have those conversations about, we will move money over here to these agencies because they're doing a better job, and you're doing this, but you're not going to be able to do that anymore because it's just not cost effective for us to do it. So we broke a few eggs. Again, that was my job. I could and did play hardball with public resources, setting performance goals and shifting dollars to higher performing organizations. We didn't just look at placement also, we looked at retention. We found some agencies that had a great job of placement, but then the folks were out on the street in another week, and then you had to put them back in and over again. So the number one goal for each of us, for our agencies, was long-term placement, not retention, not placement. We did some innovations, and I won't say this is the stars aligning this time, but we took advantage of some opportunities. We used and again, this may be down in the weeds for some of you, but at that time we used the 1115 Medicaid waiver for housing as health care, and we moved a bunch of dollars into the service delivery model because the dollars were available and we had never thought of them that way, and that helped us put housing right away. We also used 1115 Medicaid waiver dollars to create a telemedicine program for EMS. Wasn't specifically for the homeless, but it was also dealt with our other frequent flyers in the emergency care system. You know, homeless people use the emergency care system as their primary care treatment choice, but there are a lot of other folks who do as well. And when we created our telemedicine program, the EMTs show up at your place, and if they don't think you're in, like you need an emergency transport, instead of taking you anyway, which is what they used to do, we now have a doc in a box. They show the computer screen, and you have a conversation with a doctor who's back at in a central location, and they'll make recommendations. We can give you a taxi voucher to get where you need to go. Costs us $1,800 every time we roll an ambulance. I'm happy to pay a $20 cab fare someplace. And so our telemedicine program, which we were able to jumpstart with our 1115 Medicaid waiver, has been a huge, huge thing. And we also created the Center for Sobriety in the City of Houston. I mentioned earlier that when we did the interviews with the men and women on the streets, that 81% of them had some kind of interaction with the criminal justice system and a lot of tickets, and they'd spent time in jail. We were arresting 19,000 people a year for public intoxication. 19,000 people, public intoxication. And it's bad for them, but it's hugely expensive. What a colossal waste of police resources to pick somebody up who is drunk and passed out on a park bench. So, working with my Mayor Pro Tem, we had heard some things about sobering centers. And for those of you who don't know, if you're old enough in the room to have ever watched the Andy Griffith Show, you know, Otis the Town Drunk, do you know what Otis would do when he would have too much to drink? He would walk to the jail and he would let himself in. It's kind of what we did. With a little bit of intervention, you get a ride from the police. So when our officers now, across all the agencies, pick up someone who is publicly intoxicated or under the influence, and they're not otherwise combative or on warrants, they go to the Houston Center for Sobriety, and they get dropped off. It's 1/3 the cost and a fraction of the amount of time that put them in jail. They have to, it's operated by social workers. You are not incarcerated, you do not have a criminal record. You can leave. If you leave within 4 hours, you are subject to being arrested. But it's basically you stay 4 hours or until you sober up. And you go on about your life. And I swear, we had it up about 6 months, and I got a letter from someone who was from France who had come to Houston and had a really good time and been picked up, and he was so glad he didn't have to go home and explain to his wife that he'd gotten arrested in Houston, because technically he didn't get arrested in Houston. He just had a night on a pallet in the Houston Center for Sobriety. So we are really proud of those sorts of innovations to help us deal with this problem. We have the responsibility to address homelessness, as I said earlier, because it is a moral, economic, and quality of life imperative. But we really have the ability to address homelessness. And everything I just said about what we did was with existing housing dollars coming into the city, other than the one-time opening up VASH dollars for veterans. It's all a matter of figuring out, could we do it differently, and having people who were willing to do it differently. I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about what we did. I'm going to be around if you have particular questions. I'm happy to connect you. There is still a special advisor to the mayor on homelessness issues in the city of Houston. He has his hands full these days because if you look at the stats now, you're not going to find that they're quite as good, because we had something called Hurricane Harvey come through. And today, as they interview folks on the street, about a quarter of the people will tell you that and the numbers have popped back up, but they will tell you that they've been put on the street because of the hurricane, that they lost housing because of the hurricane, and it severely diminished the amount of, or access to affordable quality housing in the city. So when I said that you create a system that is dynamic and that can change and adjust, it's because circumstances change, political winds change, different things happen, and you have to keep responding. But all it takes is commitment and will and leadership. And thank you for the chance to visit with you.
Well, thank you so much, Mayor Parker. Thank you for sharing your experience and your vision with us, and really to hear such relevant, pragmatic, and dedicated solutions here. It's the kind of leadership that I think we could all get behind here in this city. So thank you for that. For those of you who really want to hear this again, this has been videotaped. It's going to be on our website, housingsandiego.org. And I know for my part, I'm going to be listening again and taking notes, because I was a little distracted today, but I'm going to be taking notes. So please, once again, for Mayor Parker, let's have a big hand. So the spirit of leadership that we just saw now is what led the Federation earlier this year to sponsor a local housing revenue bond. And while we did not succeed in getting it to the ballot this year, we laid the groundwork that will be critical to our success in 2020. And as part of that groundwork, we're asking folks to sign on as supporters. So you should have received in your bag when you came in here an endorsement card for Homes for San Diegans. That's our local campaign fund. We're going to use it for communications and other activities leading up to 2020. Please fill these out so we can communicate with you directly about the campaign. And if you want to donate, there's also a place on the website there that you can see. And it's homesforsd.org. Look at your card, it'll have the correct email address in there. More pressing, looking ahead to November, you should also find in your bag information about Props 1, the Veterans and Affordable Housing Act, and Prop 2, the No Place Like Home Act. Together, these measures will bring $6 billion to bear on the issues of housing affordability for our veterans, affordable housing for our families, seniors and neighbors with disabilities, and permanent supportive housing for our neighbors without homes. So please, if you haven't already, do go online and endorse these measures, either as individuals or as organizations. And if you can, please donate to the campaign. The website address is on the screen and on page 5 of your printed program. So please take a look. And most important of all, please vote and tell people in your immediate circle to vote. If you aren't yet registered, you can go online at the Registrar of Voters, or there's a registration card in all of the bags that you received today. How many of you are registered to vote? And how many of you are going to be there in November to vote? Okay, this is a great room. Then take that card, find someone in your life who is not registered, so who's eligible to vote, who is not registered, get them to be registered by October 22nd. That's the deadline to register for November. This is an election that means our lives, quite frankly. We've got to be out there in numbers. We've got to take this country back to a democracy. So please, use those cards. Elections have consequences, so none of us can afford to sit this one out. I also want to point out that Michael Gaulden does have his books here for sale. They're $20. He'll be here until 2:30. He'll be signing them. If you picked one up thinking it was swag, please come by, visit him, get his signature, give him $20. He'd appreciate it very much. It's a great book, and we're honored to have him here, and we hope you will honor his work by buying his book and meeting the man. He's a poet. So before our lunch program ends, I want to remind you to continue filling out evaluation forms that you receive at each session. Please fill these out and return them at the end of each session to the room monitor, volunteer. We really do value your feedback. We want to make these programs better year after year. And finally, we do look forward to seeing you again in the spring for the San Diego Housing Federation's Ruby Awards, Thursday, May 16th at the U.S. Grant Hotel. And next year's conference, October 9th and 10th. Write that down now. If you're here visiting from another organization that has a conference, we've got the 9th and 10th. We're going to be at the Hilton, which is the hotel we were at 2 years ago. We really love this place. We can't always get it the days we want. We are obviously wanting to come back here again, but we really do look forward to seeing you next year, October 9th and 10th. While we're here and while we have, there's a lot of folks in this room who have helped serve lunch, who have made this a really good afternoon for us. Let's give a big round of applause for the servers who provided us lunch. And with that, we've come to the conclusion of our lunch program. We have a little extra time, so I invite you to enjoy some networking time and at the exhibit space before heading off to the afternoon sessions at 2. The early afternoon sessions run from 2 to 3:15, and then the late sessions from 3:45 to 5. There'll be a little bit of coffee break in between. And we'll meet everybody in the foyer space right here overlooking downtown for the post-conference reception following the last workshops of the day, hosted by Sun Country Builders. Remember to use the hashtag Demanding Solutions on social media and connect with other conference attendees through the Whova app. And thank you again for being here. Thank you so much to our speakers today, Mr. Michael Gaulden, the Honorable Annise Parker. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you to all our participants. Have a great afternoon, everybody.